In our first episode of Talking Taboos, the podcast, we're joined by Ore Oduba, presenter, performer, broadcaster, and changemaker, to talk about the taboo of feeling addicted to porn through the lens of lived experience, vulnerability, and what it means to come out the other side. Taboos aren't just difficult topics. They are systems of silence sustained by judgment and shame that isolate people. And as Ore explains, porn use can become the perfect environment for that shame to thrive. In this generous and thoughtful conversation, Ore shares his own experience of being addicted to porn over 30 years and how isolation and fear of judgment kept him silent for so long. We explore exposure to porn in childhood, the impact of shame, the realities of addiction hidden in plain sight, and why so many people struggle alone without the language or support to talk about it. Please note that this episode includes discussions of addiction, suicide, grief, and mental health. Please listen with care.
It's not just porn addiction that you've been talking about. You've talked about a whole range of topics that are considered to be taboo in our society. I mean, a lot of them have shown up in our previous research in years gone by, whether that's things like grief, suicidal thoughts, mental health, addiction. You've covered a lot of topics that people have told us they find really hard to talk about.
Do you know what, Sam? Just slightly off topic, but I tend to walk around in my apartment naked. And whilst that might seem completely irrelevant, and I was speaking to Cindy Gallop about this. Cindy Gallop is the incredible woman behind the website Make Love Not Porn. And there was a wide range of conversation that we had. This was only yesterday, but I mentioned this to her. And I said, the reason is because I've laid it bare. There is nothing left to reveal. Like the shame has been lifted. And so I kind of walk around figuratively and metaphorically feeling like the freedom that I have to go about my life, having released the shame or the secrecy or the kind of the hiding behind the safety essentially of not talking about the things that make us human. That is life, that is death, that is addiction, that is regret. There are so many things that make up our human experience. But for some reason, societally, it's better that we don't talk about it. But then the minute that you do, the minute you kind of start sharing all of these struggles, these difficulties, the anxiety, the mental health, the suicidal thoughts, the fact that your family is going through a difficult period, the money struggles, you realize, Sam, we're not that extraordinary because they're going through it and they're going through it. And that openness and that vulnerability is really what connects people. And, you know, there was a point last year, there were a series of events that happened sort of from the summer onwards leading up to when I spoke to Paul Brunson about addiction. And it just kept kind of reaffirming to me, gosh, I had this other relationship with social media and with the press and essentially living a life in the public eye where I thought that I needed to kind of play the game of it, that I needed to stay relevant, that actually, you know, I needed to hide away the things that I was struggling with and kind of just really project the stuff that was going to look positive or make people think that everything was okay. I remember getting scammed online by someone professing to be Mel Robbins and putting that online and seeing, like, it was the summer, so there was no news, but it blew up. Sam, it was in papers. I was invited on interviews on the television. And then people started resonating about, gosh, my parents, my grandparents, I went through this. And then the next thing I knew, I started talking about the fact that I had lived a life through addiction. And again, the resonance that had with the audience. I spoke about my sister's suicide, and my goodness me, did that speak to so many people. And just with every single kind of statement or conversation, it just kind of really instilled in me, bloody hell, everybody is going through something. So the very notion that it's better to not talk about it is just wrong. It's just not true. Because by not talking about it, it's keeping that grip or that hold. In the case of kind of pornography addiction, it's keeping that shame locked. And that's the very reason why you can't reach out to people. It's why you become more isolated. It's why you sort of create this dual life of like, here's the one that's acceptable. Here's the one that can never see the light, can never be shared with the people that I love. What I found last year and since is that by sharing struggle, sharing difficulty, kind of looking for the people that you trust, the people that you know aren't going to judge, and that can be strangers as well, because gosh, there is a lot of kindness out there online. That actually sometimes it's your family that you're most scared of, and by finding a third party, whether that is people online or a charity that you can reach out to, someone that is just willing to listen and hear that struggle and like validate it and remind you that you are not, one, alone, two, abnormal, three, unacceptable, and like the list goes on. All of those conversations, immediately everything starts lifting and you go, gosh, there is a way out of it.
It sounds like you have been on quite an epic journey into vulnerability. I'm curious to know what was it that tipped you into this journey of vulnerability and helping others feel seen and understood and less alone? What was that tipping point for you?
There was a period of 18 months, Sam, where my entire life changed. My dad died in October 2023, and that was kind of the start, really. That was when I realized that I'd been living my whole life in fear of my father, and that pretty much every decision that I'd made in my adult life reflected the fear that I'd felt in my childhood in trying to kind of be accepted by, my dad. And, that those decisions were kind of made out of fear in order to kind of, feel like I was accepted. And so it was crazy because, I loved my dad and he did everything he could with what he knew, and he provided for us. We had quite a difficult childhood, as I'd explained in some interviews before, or certainly without speaking for anybody else. I say that again, I've spoken about it. We did have a difficult childhood, and I guess there was a point at which it was like night and day. And I realized, gosh, I have got to a point in my life where I'd been struggling, anxiety, had suicidal ideation. And I just thought it might be better if I'm not here. But I knew that I didn't want to feel like that. I knew that there's got to be a way out, even though I had no answer for that. And when my dad passed away, it was like almost an exorcism of a lot of the strife and a lot of the fear that I'd been feeling. So that's when I kind of had a look. That's when I kind of had a look at what was going on, and I recognized that I wasn't living the life that I wanted to live. Often it is in grief, it changes your perspective. And so, from that to divorce to kind of starting to make the choices of, if I'm going to go down a different course, then it is up to me to be intentional about how that life looks. But the truth was, even though I was going down that path and I had started a therapy journey and just trying to understand how I was feeling, really trying to get under the skin of who I was, how I had become to this point, it really wasn't only until my sister died that everything completely flipped. Because while I was sort of regaining some confidence and like trying to take the reins a little bit, and actually also, and it really must be said, it's just been Easter weekend, and I found my Christianity again. I found my faith, and having lived a life before that where I thought I was in complete control of not only myself but everybody connected to me, that pressure that I was putting on myself to be like, everything exists because I'm doing everything I can to kind of do more. That if I'm not working, then I need to be the best this, I need to be the best dad, I need to be the best son, I need to be the best partner. And if I'm not doing well at that, then I'm failing. If I'm not bringing in money, then I'm failing. And so actually, returning to faith allowed me to give a lot of that away and just kind of restore a little bit of balance. But yes, when my sister died, I had reconnected with my sister in a way that kind of reminded me of the relationship that we had as kids in the last kind of year and a half, 2 years of their life. And what I understood was that this was a person who was, again, really struggling in their skin, that there was a shame, there was a humiliation, there was an embarrassment, there was a fear of not being accepted as who they were, and not being able to understand why they had this complete incongruence between like wanting to live so much but not being able to, like doors, like behind closed doors, not being comfortable in themselves. And so, understanding that when they died and they did something, they my sister demonstrated a courage that I will never fully understand and appreciate, but it was like the most incredible demonstration of courage in the lead up to their death for all of us as a family, for my children, for my nieces and nephews, that I recognize I've only got this chance and I am still here. And it's really down to me to decide whether I take this opportunity to live the rest of my life or not. And, I thought when it came to speaking out, I've always had this really difficult relationship with living in the public eye. Strictly Come Dancing was 10 years ago, and it was never the intention to win the show. So you find yourself kind of in this kind of celebrity world. And for many years, it's wonderful, but it's kind of like you're going away with the riptides, and you're going with the current, and and then there's a point probably around lockdown where you go, what on earth is going on? And so, I guess having adopted that life, I was quite scared of it, quite fearful of it. And then around this time, I realized that there was a platform that actually I might be able to use this for good. And certainly if 30 years of addiction were for anything, knowing what I know now and knowing how this is affecting children, being a father myself, if there is a way for me to be able to put these two together, regardless of what it means for my world, for my career, for all of those kind of, not superficial things, but the stuff, not really the stuff that really matters. I was like, that is worth putting on the line. And if that's why I'm here, to be in the public eye, and if that's what this 30 years of addiction was for, then I'm going to make it worthwhile. I'm going to try and make a change for some people. And I thought I'll do 1 or 2 big interviews, and then I'll probably just retreat under the ground, never to be seen again. And then I was like, actually, I think I've picked up a baton here that if I put it down, I'll feel like I have shirked the responsibility that I've kind of empowered in myself. And so even the reason why we've come into contact is because as that's kind of continued in the new year and over the last couple of months, I've been like, I need to keep that thread of that messaging, of that kind of release of shame, even just within my own social media. I need to, there's a voice in the back of my head going, people are going to think you've been like banging on about it, banging the drum. I'm like, yes, keep banging the drum, keep talking about it, keep releasing the shame from it, because that's the only way that people are going to keep hearing the message. Because the whole reason why this issue is so shameful is because people aren't talking about it. And if I go, okay, I talked about it and now no longer talk about it, we've talked about it enough, people are going to start getting tired of it. It just perpetuates the cycle all over again. And the reason why we've come into contact is because I put a video up talking about the fact that I believe that one conversation can change someone's entire life, and can help somebody lift that kind of that veil of darkness, that cloak of shame, and start living the rest of their lives. And that's what you saw 6 months after I first started talking about it. And that's why we're here. So I was like, yes, case in point, keep going.
What's going on with the taboo around porn addiction specifically, and how is that impacting people? What's going on there?
You know, it's a entire industry that plays off the taboo. You know, it's the fact that it's so underground. You know, even the idea of sex in a healthy way isn't spoken about in the way that it should be. So something that is so vulnerable, but so beautiful, you know, that already has its own element of shame attached to it. So when you add something like an industry like the pornography industry, you know, there are behaviors, there are habits, there are instincts that we have as human beings that if we can add shame to it, it means that they can put that in a place where, yeah, I guess if it kind of lives in the shadows. I guess the thing that I found that was so striking and where, you know, I was able to bring my own unfortunate lived experience is that when you are a child of 9 years old with access to the online world, you're going to come across it. But without the right guidance, like so many of life's other pitfalls, those children like me are only going to, fed by their own curiosity of the world, wanting to understand the world around them and how they fit into it. They're going to go down a path of educating themselves without the kind of intervention that you need from parents and caregivers and teachers. And so sadly, something that could be remedied by one conversation. Actually, even a child knows that this is probably something that I shouldn't necessarily be seeing. But because pornography is so based on fantasy and it's so based like supersizing the imagination, even not at its most extreme, it's about, there is something neurologically that it taps into, that, you know, is based on a lot of our human instincts that is never going to be bridged by reality. And so, you know, as a kid, even as a grown up and as an adult, you get lost in that place. And so, yeah, I guess when I discovered the figures, when I discovered the stats that 80% of kids are finding pornography via social media, that 60% are finding it by accident, and like kids as young as 6 are coming across it, you know, because, you know, these are digital natives now. This is the primary way that people are navigating the world. And with an industry like pornography, which has changed so exponentially in 30 years from, you know, analog to DVDs and broadband and digital and now smartphones, and you can access it at the touch of a button or a swipe of a finger. That taboo, by not bringing it up, like I just could see the huge kind of like canyon that all of these young people are going to fall into if we don't talk about it. But it continues to be an industry that kind of preys on shame, preys on it's a taboo, and they can create a world so far away removed from like a normal conversation that that again I just felt like we have to talk about it. And I recognize there was a point last year when the online safety bill was passed. A few weeks after that, the Children's Commissioner published this report that gave all of these stats. And I think 24 hours later, it was, you know, yesterday's news and fish and chip paper today. And I thought, I can't believe this. I can't believe people can't identify that this is a real issue for children. So I felt like something that I definitely knew that I had the experience to say something and I was ready to do it. But I think, again, it's because there isn't an established protocol template for talking about healthy sex, let alone talk and healthy sexual relationships, let alone talking about the world of adult explicit imagery. The risks aren't discussed at all. The harms, the dangers, you know, it's just another one of life's many pitfalls. But we have a better understanding about how to deal with alcoholism and drug abuse and food disorders and self-harm and suicide. And these are huge issues that have come out of the dark because we have a much better way of approaching them. And there is wonderful charities out there doing great work and building up the vocabulary for people and building up the network for people to go to. But despite the fact that the digital world is the primary way most people will engage with other human beings, I don't think we're taking seriously the fact that as a result of that, there's going to be a whole other world of difficulty, danger, addiction. And for most people, it'll be the kids that walking through that vortex will be the ones affected.
It sort of sounds like, the other things that you mentioned, like alcoholism, there's very much a public health approach to that. We don't have that for things like porn addiction. That system isn't in place. The education isn't there. And at the moment, it's very much relying on people like yourself and advocates in that space for just vulnerability and open conversations.
Yeah.
That's where this work is happening. And also, other clinicians that are out there as well, whether that's Dr. Paula Hall, for example, of Pivotal Recovery. There's lots of people working in the spaces talking about it openly, but there's not that system in place that you've just been.
That's it.
I suppose.
I think we would all agree. I think, that I'm doing some work with Paula, and Paula feeds into the Naked Truth Project, which is another charity that I'm doing a lot of work with. And all of these guys agree it is a public health issue, that there's kind of a block, because there is even the language around it is that it's problematic use as opposed to addiction. And I think what's difficult from a kind of a governmental perspective is that it's quite hard to put a metric on the result of this, of problematic use of pornography or sex addiction. The compulsive disorder, I think it's one of the umbrellas that it goes up there. Hard to put a metric or hard to quantify the effect of that societally. And so as it stands, it's kind of sits in this bracket of not necessarily being public health. It's more of an individual issue. I spoke to Paul, and she spoke about being a spectrum disorder. And I was a very good case in point where, you can be highly functioning. On the outside, you can look like everything is going great, like there's not a single issue in your life. But behind the scenes, things are breaking down. You do have addictive behaviors. It is kind of taking over your life. It is something that you crave. It is something that you look forward to. There are negative consequences. And I use that definition from Gabor Mate, who is the trauma specialist, who is kind of the leading voice in this field, and talking about the fact that addiction is any behavior that has negative consequences that a person craves and cannot give up. And again, it's that idea of looking at it now from a numbers perspective. Pornhub was one of the top 3 websites that was looked at globally in 2024. Top 3 behind Instagram and Wikipedia. Sort of numbers wise, we're talking about hundreds of millions of users a month. Even if you were to look at that, the drip down, I think I would love to have the numbers next to it. This affects a huge amount of people, and those are the people that would admit it, let alone the people that are living in shame or wouldn't even dare to write it in a survey, let alone speak to anybody out loud. So again, it's that idea that we are staring at our phones more than we're connecting with real people, and all of the hazards that come with it are all hard. I talk about the fact that you can be doing your big shop at one point, or you can be on a Zoom call with somebody, and I know this happens a lot, and people are engaging in adult explicit imagery on another device throughout the day. The Naked Truth Project guys were the ones that told me that 9 to 5 are the busiest times of day that people will watch pornography. Not 10 to 3 o'clock in the morning. It is in the day. It's because it's just there. And those 3 A's of addiction: accessibility, anonymity, and affordability. It's so available to everybody that use over time, whether you think it's something that starts off innocently and then becomes a little bit more frequent, and then something that you look forward to, then becomes a dependency, naturally these things are going to fall into addiction. The case is that the important thing is, have we got the network in place for people to know where to go to be able to have those open, non-judgmental conversations so that something like this doesn't become a huge issue. It already is a massive issue, but it doesn't become like every other person, because if that's what we're looking at, and these are people who know algorithmically, behaviorally, neurologically how the brain works, that if you put things in the right place, then they can manipulate our behavior. And half of the problem with addiction is we don't know that we're in addiction until the point at which getting better seems easier than going through the pain of it. And certainly what changed for me, it's kind of a slippery slope until you get into the trenches, and then it's kind of impossible to get out of it. We just have to make sure that the support is around for people who are going through it.
Something that's interesting about porn addiction or compulsive use, whatever the umbrella terms are.
Right, yes.
Someone prefers to talk about it is, I'm not too worried about how it's labelled. However someone chooses to talk about it, great, how they define it. So if you look at alcohol, there's almost like an immediate impact, an immediate consequence. If you drink so much alcohol, you might black out. If you take so many drugs, you might overdose. If you gamble so much money, you'll not have any money left. Those like in the moment things that happen. I'm not sure, is that happening with porn use?
It's such a good point. And only the other day I was on Good Morning Britain, and Kate Garraway asked me, and she said, I know you've been speaking about addiction, and I've known you for some time, and I just would never have thought that you'd be someone who might have fallen into addiction. And this was a conversation that I had with a lot of people that I was close to, from agents to PR to employers, before I spoke about this publicly. And I was like, this is half of the issue. There is a perception of what an addict looks like. It's an alcoholic. It's someone who's been using drugs. It's someone who's lost all the money from gambling. That's what we're kind of comfortable with. That's so far what we're okay with, that's what addiction looks like. It's rock stars who've kind of, throwing stuff out of hotel windows and going on 2-week benders. I was like, this is what addiction looks like. It is in plain sight. And for so many people, especially today in the way that we sort of consume the world, it is hidden away in a very dark place, away from the people that you love. It's just as isolating. It is just as foreboding of all the things that you love doing. Like the research is there, the science is there, that actually when you fall into addiction, you stop doing the things that you love, you stop connecting with the people that you love, and you kind of stop living. On the flip side, and maybe you can see what the alcoholic looks like, you can see what the drug abuser looks like. From a sexual health point of view, pornography addiction and pornography use, full stop, has a huge impact on that side. And of course, that's not the outside projecting self that you're connecting to with most people. That comes down to who you are with the person or the people in your life in that realm. There is, for me, I've described it as the fact that from 9 years old being exposed to this, pornography was the first relationship that I was ever in. And actually, it was the constant throughout all of my relationships until I got out of it for 30 years. And so when you have that kind of, in order to get to a place, I always have that imagery in my mind. That is always going to be a block for you connecting with somebody else in a romantic sense, because you kind of got an ideal, like I said, like you have this fantasy, this kind of concrete fantasy in your mind that is, that's the place that you go. So nothing real is ever going to reach that. And so again, while it's quite difficult to quantify, I think there is a huge impact on the sexual relationships and the romantic relationships and what it is that it looks like as a healthy relationship at all, because you have created the fantasy, and the connection that you have to that fantasy is so inbuilt. And, I know that Dr. Paula does a lot of work with, and Naked Truth as well. And there's a lot of work with partners and with the family members of people who come out of having pornography or sex addiction, because, like all of these, it's dopamine. It's not even about, it's actually not even about the material. It's often, whilst that might have an impact on the kind of things that you find arousing or attractive, the reason why people go back to it is because of there is a connection. There's a void that is filling. There's a dopamine reception that, especially over time, when you repeat that over and over and flood that dopamine center, you need something more intense in order to receive the same kind of high, which is why these things become more problematic over time, and it gets you further and deeper into the kind of the quagmire of it. And so that's why, there was a report quite recently of, it's recognizing the NHS that boys, there was a huge, increase in erectile dysfunction. It's why within relationships, even being able to talk about sex within a relationship becomes difficult. And so, again, these are all things that are behind closed doors that you're not going to be able to talk about with your neighbor next door, or to be able to see kind of in full technicolor, because that's all part of the taboo. And if in your own relationship there's shame and taboo, then you're even isolating yourself from the person that you're closest to in your life. So it's really problematic in that sense too.
I think so much of what you have just described, what's going on is it's like the perfect ecosystem for a taboo to thrive. It's like for a taboo, it's the ideal environment to survive and stick and keep people feeling isolated and feeling shame and feeling like they can't do anything about it or get out of it or get support. And I think that's, in my mind, a really powerful image, is to just visualize how that taboo is thriving in, and keeping people in the same position. And obviously you've been through a hell of a lot that's led you to a position of vulnerability and openness. And I imagine there are plenty of people who are sort of listening to this and listening to other things that you've said and other interviews that you've done, and they still feel stuck and unable. They might feel seen. They might have that sort of like, oh, it's not just me.
Yeah.
They have that sort of block still of the next step. So what now? How do I make a change? How can I get out of this? What would you say to someone who's really suffering from the impacts of this taboo? What would you say to them if they are struggling and they just don't feel able to take that next step and talk to someone or get some support with it?
Oh gosh. And I think about that person, because that person was me even very recently, and it's coming up to 2 years. And it's still, by the way, a daily practice. It's still a daily conversation that I have with myself of I'm worth more, I am valued, I have so much abundance of love in my life that I've discovered since I got out of this. I don't need to go back to that thing. What are the kind of practices that I know I can do to sort of check into if any of those urges or those feelings kind of wander back into my consciousness? That I remember how it felt, and it is that it's the worst. It's the worst. It's not living. And kind of the isolation, but also the shame and the taboo of it makes you feel like you really are the worst of society. And that despite being a good person, that actually that other part of you makes you unacceptable, and that you have to hide it away forever. And I never knew that there was a possibility that I could live this life as free and as liberated and as loved as I do today. And so I guess it would be to tell that person that I was that person, and I had the same fear, and I had the same kind of dead end and the same rock bottoms, thinking that there is no way out of this. But there is. And it really can start with one conversation. I actually think the first step is admitting it with yourself. I think it really is going, I have a problem, I have an issue, and I would like to make a change. And for that, I would like shout amen, celebrate whoever that person is, because even admitting it to yourself, like it took me 30 years to recognize that I'd got myself into something that I was dictating every day of my life. And I wanted to put a stop to it because it was having a detrimental effect on my life and the people around me. And by admitting it, that was the first step. The second step is who are the people? And you might not know who those people are. They might not be the people in your immediate or your secondary or your third circle. It might be reaching out to a complete stranger. It might be reaching out to one of these charities that we've talked about, whether it's Naked Truth or Pivotal Recovery, or, there's a lot of wonderful addiction charities out there. And just hearing, for me, when I spoke to my therapist and I was kind of at this point of complete nonchalance, I was like, there's kind of nothing else. There's nothing else kind of to hide behind, because it's almost to the point of indifference. Like my life is so saturated with this addiction that how much worse can it be if I just mentioned it? And I remember mentioning it to my therapist and saying, and also I think I'm addicted to pornography, thinking that the world was going to end and, a big hole was going to open up and swallow me into it. And the exact opposite happened. And she said, okay, thank you for telling me. It's actually much more normal than you think. There's a lot of people that are struggling with this. And even just hearing that made me go, oh, I'm not on my own. I'm not broken and unfixable. And I'm not the worst of society. Is that what you're saying? And by her saying that to me, it was like, well, because I've been desperate to try to change this. So I've just never known if someone like me, that was even possible. And so she kind of planted that seed for me. And then I could start finding the strength. And then I started speaking to friends about it and almost dropping it in. And again, when you discover that those people, whilst it might not have been what they were expecting to hear, still love you, you're like, oh, because again, I'd spent decades telling myself that I was unlovable if I ever came out with this.
If a friend has come to you and shared this information with you, how can you be there for them in that conversation that's going to make them feel loved and feel seen and safe to continue that conversation? I suppose, what have you learned from those that you've had?
It's the most important thing, is just to be there, just to listen, just to let it breathe. Because the confidence, the terror, the fear that it has taken for that person to let it out, just hold that space for them. Just to let them know that, one, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not shirking. I'm not reacting. I'm just here for you. It's like just holding that space without judgment, without fixing. I think there's a lot of us who, there's one thing, I remember there being a big campaign a couple of years ago about let's talk. I was like, I think the idea is let's listen. Because I think for a lot of people, it's like, oh, we can talk because I know someone who's got a thing and we can build on what you're like. I don't need fixing right now. I just need you to listen to the fact that I have a problem, and the fact that you love me is enough for me to make the next step. People are only going to change because they want to, or they can. And if you give them the chance to find the tools themselves, that's a much better way to get to sustainable change than if somebody goes, oh, I know the way that you can, like, no fixing, no judgment, just hold the space. People want to make a change, but they often, it's so many of us, it's kids, like kids want to be able to be given the power to make the change or to do the things themselves. And if we mollycoddle them and tell them, this is what you need to do, and sort of helicopter in to kind of help them, they're never going to be able to create the tools themselves that are going to turn them into the grown-ups that they want to be. They'll always be looking for that help. But certainly in this case, we all have the power to make a change for ourselves. And that is helped by having an incredible network and incredible support, and we can guide, but even in those first steps, it really is just about holding space, holding the hand, giving the hug, and reminding that person they are loved, they are valued, and they are accepted in any shape or form. And actually, if you want to go forward with this, I'm here with you. And I'm proud of you. And when I started doing that with those people, slowly and surely, you can see the relief and the confidence starting to grow and going, okay, well, in that case, if I've got the support that I need, let's go, let's make the change.
You've mentioned building confidence a few times, and you're having conversations with yourself over and over again. It sounds a bit, you've been building a skill here. These are conversations that we're not used to having. And so it's like training a muscle.
Yeah.
And you're doing it again and again and again and again. And it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, absolutely. These are, oh man, these are things that are all trainable. And I think, I think when I think of addiction, I think it lives in fear. The reason why we come to addiction is because we're kind of, there's a safety subconsciously that we've fallen into something that is filling something that was missing. And by repeating that behavior, again, you're kind of training your brain. You're kind of training your brain that actually that's the thing that's the safest option. It's the easiest option that you can kind of return to. And so it's also reversible. I think, I can't remember who said this quote, but I think it is really powerful. They said something like, the answers that we seek are in the silence that we're running away from. And I think that really says it all. Like, especially with addiction, it seems like it's a safe thing, but we're running away from the solution. And the minute that you kind of stop, but you register that there's an issue, that there's a problem, that there's something that is, it's still missing. I talk about the fact that you can, you can watch all the trash TV that you want. You can have all the distraction techniques. You can, go to the bottle. You can go to pornography. You can go to the drugs. The issues are all still going to be there. And so the answers that we're looking for are in the light. We have to run away from that, keep that darkness away and run into the light. And that's where you can sort of retraining. It's a very long and arduous and really difficult process. But I think certainly when it comes to addiction, it's running away from something that, will catch up with you in the end. And the only way to get over it is to face it. And that individual is the person that can face it. We are just lucky to find the people that want to kind of help you through it.
I've learned so much in this conversation with you. I mean, it's been such a pleasure to listen to you and hear from your experience. I have one final question for you.
Yeah.
So you've got a magic wand in your hand and you have the power to stop this taboo of porn addiction in its tracks, the things that keep it in the dark and staying in silence. What are you doing to stop it and to make more people feel able to talk about it and get support?
Wow. After all of these conversations with young people, with parents, with teachers, with caregivers, with people in positions of power, change makers, I think the remedy to something like addiction in this realm isn't banning it. It isn't hiding away from it. I think it is giving the positive remedy to it so that people have a better chance of making better choices. And I think that means creating the societal template that means better sexual education, better conversations around healthy sex and healthy relationships. And I think that starts early. I think it starts frequently. It's a conversation that is had frequently. And lifelong. It would be amazing if to answer the question of the wand, how can we build into society, into schools, into syllabuses, into curriculums, into households, into society as a whole, where we know from early childhood, this is how we speak to children about healthy sex, what respect looks like, what kindness looks like, what vulnerability looks like, what connection looks like, what communication looks like, into tweens and teens, how that changes age appropriately, into young adults, how that changes appropriately, so that the point it comes to sort of 18, it's not quite the same. But if you imagine how 18-year-olds go with their parents to the pub and go, I'm going to buy you your first pint, you're ready to take on the world. How can we get our 18-year-olds to a point where we have done everything we can and educated them enough so that they know what healthy sexual relationships look like and how to make a good choice, how to respect other people, how the wonder and beauty of this, like, most integral, the most important part of the human experience, what it looks like. And that's the way that you're going to beat or counter the problem of pornography addiction, sex addiction, and going into the darkness, because there is no shame. All of these things, all of these pitfalls, they're going to exist in life as they do with all of these other things that, you know, are problematic in our world. But we give our kids a much better chance of making a better choice if we have those conversations early.
So it seems to me that you are actually already beginning to build this system just by having these conversations. It's like founding conversations.
I think that's the answer. Sam. You know, I think what would I have wished I had had between the ages of 9 and 18, let alone 18 to 38, but it would have been to go, here's how I'm trying to navigate this world. I've seen this thing. I don't know if it's right or wrong. I don't know if I should be looking at it, but I can't take my eyes away from it. And now it's creating the person that I'm going to become. It's actually affecting my social sexual mapping. It's going to be the thing that I go back to when I think about relationships. It's actually, for me, what I understand for what love and adult relationships looks like. There's been not a single adult intervening in preventing me from creating that image in my own mind. What I wish is that there had been an adult caregiver to have told me, here's what it really looks like. Here's what can be great. Here's what relationships are all about. Here's what sex can be. This isn't what it's going to be. And in fact, this is actually going to harm you in the long run. It might seem like a quick fix. It might be something that might be fun for the moment, but actually over time, it's going to ruin what you think is a good life. And that it could have been as simple as that. It isn't that simple because societally there's a reason why this thing lives underground, and why, you know, especially us as British feel like talking about sex is a very un-British thing to do. So there is a whole kind of societal thing that needs kind of restructuring. But I think when we see the danger, when we see, like, if you spool forward and see when you understand that, you know, 6-year-olds are getting exposed to this kind of content, you know, that teenagers are sharing violent imagery of explicit adult content between themselves, and there isn't a guide, there isn't a template of what to do. You fast forward 5-10 years, it really does end up in the realms of the things that we find that would most the heinous and really difficult problems that happen in society. And that is talking about sexual crime. You know, if that's the stuff that we want to prevent, it isn't about banning it. It's about talking about it. It's about understanding early that there is a harm at the end of that road. And so, yeah, I want to be a part of that. And I know there's a lot of people that want to be a part of that. That the taboo goes, the shame goes if we start talking about it.
Oh, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been incredibly, incredibly enlightening. And I just want, before we finish, for anyone who's watching this who is curious about where they can go, would you mind just mentioning the charities that have come up throughout this conversation?
Yeah, Naked Truth Project are a charity based in Manchester that help with pornography and sex addiction. And Pivotal Recovery is a program for helping people get over that, similar kind of issue. Have a search, have a Google. They've got presence on Instagram and social media. But, drop me a message on Instagram. I'll be happy to point you in another direction. But yeah, the help is out there, and people are prepared to talk about it and will help you. Sure.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, sir.
If any of the experiences in this conversation have resonated with you, please know you're not alone. There are people you can talk to and places you can turn to for support. You can call Samaritans for free on 116-123 or visit Mind at mind.org.uk for information and support. For help with feeling addicted to porn, you can find free support through Brooke, The Mix, Pivotal Recovery, Sex Addicts Anonymous, and The Naked Truth. Links and details are in the show notes.